I think what matters at the end of the day is really where your audience is. I think understanding who your audience are and understanding where they operate online. I think that's super, or even offline, but I think like particularly, in the age of social media, where they operate online, I think that is super important. And I think crafting a strategy where you're very targeted about, like where and how and what is the message that you want to deliver to your audience. I think that is probably, that is definitely, the key to success.
You're listening to Freight Famous, presented by Rose Rocket, bringing you the people that make trucking move. From behind the scenes into the limelight. Here's your host, Justin Bailey.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Freight Famous, a podcast produced by Rose Rocket. New episodes of Freight Famous will be released about twice a month. On this podcast, we talk with guests about how they build, scale, and automate their trucking and transportation businesses. I am your host, Justin Bailey, co-founder at Rose Rocket, and today I'm excited to welcome my guest, Kevin Huang. Kevin is the co-founder of Trucking Up, the next generation payroll software for trucking fleets. He was previously a software engineer at Uber and went through the Y Combinator Startup Accelerator, just like us over here at Rose Rocket. He's a fellow alumni. He got his start in trucking by visiting truck stops and making TikTok videos. Now he's on a mission to reinvent back office software for trucking companies, starting with payroll. Welcome, Kevin.
Thanks for having me here, Justin.
My pleasure. So taking on back office software in trucking, you decided to go after the most exciting aspect of all businesses in the world. Looking maybe for, gave obviously a brief introduction on who you are, but maybe more about your background in terms of where'd you grow up? How'd you kind of find your way into technology, and how did you land in truck stops with a cell phone making TikTok videos?
Oh, wow. Okay, let's start from the beginning. I was born and raised in China. I grew up in Shenzhen, which is actually like a really big tech hub in China. My father also works in technology. So kind of like grew up in that environment. I came to the US for high school when I was about 15, spent some time on the East Coast, and then I went to Berkeley for undergrad. I studied mechanical engineering in college. Right after college, I spent about 2 years working in manufacturing myself. But pretty soon after that, I think I just got, kind of bored and decided to get into software and coding. Went through a startup in San Francisco and then eventually joined Uber. I worked on Uber's rideshare marketplace. I did not work on Uber Freight. A lot of people ask me that question if I worked at Uber Freight. I did not work at Uber Freight, but I did spend some time building out Uber's rideshare marketplace. And basically after Uber, I just always knew I wanted to start a company. So essentially after Uber, I started, tinkering around with different startup ideas. Got into Y Combinator, and most recently, just got really interested in trucking. I think there's always kind of like a transportation and logistics bone in me, and wanted to dig into trucking. But I think when we first met, I told you I didn't really have the background. So a lot of my friends, I have some friends that built trucking companies before, and the advice they gave me was, hey, just go to truck stops, talk to some truckers, and that's the best way you can learn about the industry. So that's how I did it. Just went to truck stops, started talking to truckers, and really didn't start making TikTok until probably like a month or two into the process. And I think friends around me would always ask me, hey, like, how was your truck stop visit today? What did you see? What did you learn? And maybe you should make some, videos about your experience. And that's kind of like what gave me the initial idea of making, social media for my truck stop visits. And after I did that, that quickly got picked up by truckers on social media. And that became what my trucking, TikTok account it is today. So that's kind of like the brief story in terms of my journey into trucking.
So for those listening, Kevin came onto my radar, I think using a similar motion that he's been doing all along. He showed up in my inbox one day. I don't actually totally remember, but asking for help or advice or something along those lines. And as much as that feels special, I know I'm one of many he's talking to on a regular basis. Kevin is an incredibly curious individual, and I don't say that lightly. Coming from sort of the startup space and being around tons of people in technology and tons of entrepreneurs, curiosity is a word we use with a lot of regularity. And I think there are obviously a spectrum of curiosity. I would put Kevin really high on the curious scale, because not only does he get out and engage, he listens very well, and he's also receptive to feedback, and sometimes very direct, at least from me. So I think it's refreshing. I think I wanted to have you on the podcast today because I'm impressed with that level of curiosity and willingness to learn. But I'm also interested from your perspective, from not being in the industry. Our show is largely made up of people who have a ton of industry expertise, and you could say, well, this is the way I see things, or this is the way we did things. And I've been doing them all along, which I think is great and super valuable for the audience. But I think giving them a different look from someone who's new to the space, I'd be curious on after going out into the truck stops and after talking to the hundreds of people you're doing, and I know you do some meetups even in San Francisco, and you've really jumped in with 2 feet into trying to learn about transportation. What have you been learning? And what have you seen? And sort of some conclusions you're coming to that maybe weren't so obvious to you from the outside looking in.
Oh man, that's a loaded question. I think one of the biggest lessons I learned is probably it's a very different industry. Coming from the tech industry, I would say trucking is a very, very different industry from the environment I came from. I think you probably hear a lot, trucking is built on relationships. Trucking is slow moving. I think there are a lot of these opinions about the trucking industry. I would say some of it is true, definitely, but I think at the same time, it's also just understanding like the nature of the industry is, first of all, it's an incredibly fragmented industry. It's really hard to, roll up the entire industry all at once. I think one of the questions that I had when first coming into the industry, really naive, the question I had was, hey, why hasn't something like Uber Freight or Convoy just dominated the entire industry overnight? Why hasn't that happened? I think the tech, technologists in me just okay, there should be a single marketplace that roll up all the supply and demand, and boom, there's an Uber for trucking and overnight. But that's just not really the case. And I think what I realized is there's so much specialization in trucking, and it is a service industry after all. There's specialization in different lanes. There's a lot of nuances in terms of servicing different lanes. There's a lot of differences in servicing different types of loads. For example, drive-in is very different from flatbed, and you start to see very specialized flatbed marketplaces popping up. For example, XO Freight is a batchmate of mine from YC. So I think there's a lot of nuances I started to understand after I got deeper into the industry that I just didn't really appreciate from the beginning. I was that was one thing that was really eye-opening as I kind of really dove in. I think the other thing is it's the technology. I think I think it's less about whether people want to adopt technology or not. Is more about, is the technology actually working for the people? And I think it's very easy to come into the industry, assume that, okay, I am the technologist, I know what to build for people. I know what's best for them. But I think that is kind of not the right way of thinking about it. And I think that's why, for me, it's really important to really kind of see the world from the level of the user, and by getting as close to their life as possible, by talking to them, by going to their office, sitting next to them, and see what they see, rather than imagining a world that, hey, this is how I think your world should be, and therefore here are the tools I built for you to make your life easier. I feel like that is maybe the view I had initially when I first came into the industry, but that is not really the right way of tackling the problem. I would say that's another big learning I had in terms of really putting yourself in the shoes of the user, rather than trying to inventing something that you think they want, if that makes sense.
It does. It's a business that is it does reject a lot of academic concepts, right? So it's this makes sense in other areas. This should make sense over here. Something I really noticed about this space too, and it's maybe this is other areas as well, but I think trucking is it's so evergreen still in many ways that you see a lot of what I think people are trying to apply, what I call sort of B2C logic to a B2B market. So you start thinking about, again, Uber, why wouldn't that work in trucking? Well, I think the first thing that I draw to on any analogy, I was speaking to somebody that you probably introduced me to actually, recently, and they were giving some concepts around we want to be the I don't know, the plaid for trucking or the Gmail for trucking. It's like, okay, but like these are sort of largely baked in B2C outcomes, right? And I think that's you see that a lot in this space. And I don't know if that's, again, that could be others. I'm only in this space, so that's what I see. But I think that's really risky. And I do, again, there's a lot of just things, and I think it's because of the fragmentation that just simply don't work here the way they should. Now, as a technologist, when you hear me say something like that, all I'm doing is challenging those. And they're like, this is another guy who's wrong. This is a guy who's beat down the industry. This is a guy who's a laggard old guy, and I'm going to do something to change that. But it seems time and time again that there just is this inability to really, to your point, have one system, pick your category, to rule them all at this point. Will it happen? Maybe. But it feels like almost if that's going to happen, it's going to be through some like private equity consolidation, outcome versus some product that just stands up and takes everybody. Now, again, I'm challenging the youth because they're hearing me say this and they're like, I'm going to be the one. So we'll see. But I think to your point, I have seen all of that and I agree with it. And it's interesting, you've seen the same thing today that I saw, 13, 14 years ago, as I kind of came in with the same, I don't know, ideas, I guess, or at least naivety.
Yeah, if I can even add to that a little bit, I think this kind of comes back to the specialization of the freight industry. I think it's, take TMS, for example. I think the TMS for a long haul trucking company could very much be different from the TMS, for example, like a drayage company, because, they need to deal with like yard, they need to deal with like storing the containers in different places. So I think those are like, just like, again, like, I think it's very easy to think that freight is very homogenous, but I think in reality, it really is not. And I think that is what makes it hard to have, kind of like a unified. I think anybody that kind of like have that view of like, oh, like, you should just have like a simple marketplace that unifies everything. I think they just maybe just like sometimes they don't like have the nuanced understanding of like how like different freight can be very different. And therefore, like that's why, for example, like just for example, I was at Oakland Port last week, visiting some trucking companies. The TMSs that I came across are very, very different from the TMSs I talk about, when visiting, the long haul trucking companies in Stockton, just because they have fundamentally different needs. So I think that's another reason why it's so hard to like, kind of like really roll up all these trucking companies, because they're just different companies.
Yeah, the only thing they really have in common is they use trucks and they need drivers to drive the trucks. And the rest of it really is these are different businesses, right? So they get the category of trucking company, but that's just for like database purposes. At the end of the day, like these are different types of businesses. They make money in different ways, different types of customers. The whole thing is quite different. So when you're out visiting ports and truck stops, and what are you seeing out there today? So, selfishly, I'm sitting here, behind a microphone in downtown Toronto. I don't get out to trucking companies the way I used to, and if I do, they're oftentimes customers that we already have or have kind of long-standing relationships with. So I don't really have the privilege to kind of be on the front lines like I used to. And so, what is happening out there? What are you seeing out there? What's top of mind for these companies? All the things. Tell me what's happening on the street today.
Yeah, I think one of the first things that people will say is probably around like fuel prices. I think that's probably been like one of the biggest like top of mind concerns for a lot of trucking companies, and that comes up again and again. I think the other thing is, especially in California, I think around AB5. That's another like really big topic that comes up quite a bit when I talk to trucking companies. And to be honest with you, that's really what gave me the initial spark to started looking into payroll and back office for trucking companies, is because I think we are seeing this change in the industry, whether it will go through or not. But I think there's this, definitely momentum of change in the industry that might really reshape the employment structure and back office for that matter, for a lot of trucking companies. So that kind of gave me the inspiration to look into, the payroll software and back office. I would say AB5 is definitely like a big thing.
And can you explain for those who don't know what AB5 is?
So AB5 is really interesting. It's actually really interesting. AB5 is it's also called a gig worker law. It's originally passed in 2019, targeting Uber, Lyft, Instacart, these type of gig economy companies. I actually dealt with AB5 firsthand when it first passed. I was at Uber at the time, and we had to put together a special task force to basically alter the product in a certain way so it's compliant with the initial version of AB5. So I actually dealt with AB5 at the very, very onset at Uber. And then now it's coming back full circle with so AB5 actually is no longer impacting these gig economy companies because of Prop 22. Prop 22, what it is a proposition that was basically kind of like a lobbying effort from Uber, Lyft, these companies to exempt these type of gig economy companies from AB5. And the whole purpose of AB5 is to help with classification of workers because Uber and Lyft, they're classifying drivers as freelancers rather than employees, so they don't have to pay out a lot of the kind of like employment benefits to these, like Uber drivers and Lyft drivers, which save on cost. On the other hand, driver gets more flexibility, so they can work with multiple companies at once. But I think that is definitely a two-sided coin. And the issue that AB5 is trying to fix is to help these freelancers to gain employment benefits through these companies. But right now, actually, with Prop 22, AB5 is no longer impacting these gig economy companies, but rather is impacting trucking industry directly. As you know, there's a big independent contractor model, within trucking. A lot of lease owner operators leasing onto larger fleets. Owner operators, working with larger fleets. So that's actually like a really prevalent model in trucking. And now AB5 is impacting that model, meaning right now, at least in California, drivers have to either work as a fully independent owner operator, meaning they run their own authority and they handle, all of their, load finding and back office themselves, or they have to just be a W-2 employee for the trucking fleet. So this essentially nullifies the lease on owner operator model in California, which is I think they're about probably like again, I don't remember the exact number, but I think last time I checked, it's about like 70,000 owner operators in California, and this will impact like a significant number of them. So I think this is definitely pretty impactful, and that is kind of like the whole context of the AB5 protest back in the LA port and the Oakland port that was happening in June and July early this year.
And so this is a thing that's obviously top of mind for the drivers. Is obviously something that's kind of turns the way that this business is built on its head. Is this something that's happening in other states as well, or is this just simply a California thing right now?
This is driven by California, but I think other states are starting to think about this. I think namely New Jersey, Illinois, I think maybe even New York, but I know there are a few other states are starting to think about this. And I think more recently, the Biden administration also passed it's not exactly the same law, but I think there's another proposal being passed right now to basically have like a similar regulation for independent contractors nationwide rather than just in California. I don't think that has been fully, I don't think that has that proposal, the nationwide proposal has fully gone through yet, but it definitely feels very, very similar to the California AB5 that is kind of like, I guess, like reshaping kind of like how independent contractor is being classified across the country for trucking.
Okay. So just pivoting a little bit from this, I'm thinking about your visits and talking to folks at the ports and the truck stops. And, again, you've told me about some of these things you're doing, and I watched a little bit of it on LinkedIn. But some folks here have watched some of what you're doing on TikTok, as we mentioned, and you've kind of made reference to that. And I'm curious around that, and I think our listeners would be as well, because I think it's a technology that we use as again, it's a very prevalent now social media tool for watching videos and wasting just lots and lots of your hours on. But I'm wondering about it as a business tool. And who's on it, because again, I think for me, I'm not on TikTok. It's I feel like I'm whether I'm old or just too non-technical for it, I don't know. It's just kind of, it misses me for, whoever they're aiming for has kind of missed me. Although I do have friends on it. I'm wondering about how to utilize it in B2B. And I'm wondering about how trucking companies or freight brokerages can think about TikTok for their business. Because I'm going to coin you as an expert on this now based on you being on the show, and I wanted to bring this up. So inform us a little bit on the power of TikTok and how to think about it maybe for your business.
I think TikTok fundamentally is one of the newest social platform. It's probably, right now you can argue that it's perhaps one of the most popular social platforms out there. Fundamentally, I think the thing to understand about TikTok is fundamentally structured differently than Instagram, than Twitter, and these like some of the more traditional social platforms. Traditional social platforms is structured mainly based on your social graph, meaning it's about who you know, similar to LinkedIn, like what connections you have, and therefore the content you have will reach those people like through your social graph. However, TikTok is based on the concept of interest graph, meaning like it doesn't matter who you know. Actually, you basically don't need to have any connection, but rather TikTok will find a way to distribute your content to the people that are interested in seeing what you have to offer. So I think that is something that's really interesting about TikTok, and something good to know is like how do you create content that is curated for a specific audience. And TikTok, if you create the right content, TikTok will help you reach that specific niche audience. And I think that's kind of like what I did initially with TikTok. I was kind of embarrassed when I first started TikTok. I used like a anonymous email that I created separate from my personal email. I didn't use any like personal information because I didn't want my friends to see, kind of like what I was doing. Cause I think simply I was just like a little embarrassed and a little self-conscious when I first started TikTok experimentation. But actually without any connections, TikTok was able to quickly distribute my content to like truckers on TikTok by using the right hashtags, and following the right people, commenting on the right, kind of like right videos that quickly helped me distribute my content to basically all the truckers on TikTok. And that's like really how my content got picked up. So I think it's definitely like a very interesting distribution mechanism. In terms of the audience, I think this is also something really worth paying attention to. I think the majority audience, as far as freight goes, the majority audience that I notice on TikTok are drivers. It can be company drivers, can be owner operators. It can be people that spend a lot of time on the road because it's a great entertainment platform. When you're at the truck stops, maybe you have some time to kill. You can listen to podcasts, but you can also now start to watch TikTok. Actually, when I like visit truck stops, go into the break rooms, I actually see a good amount of like drivers like using TikToks just like in the break room rather than like watching TV and other form of entertainment. So I think it's definitely like a really great platform for drivers themselves. So I think if you are, for example, a broker that are trying to recruit, like owner operators, or if you're a fleet trying to recruit drivers, I think TikTok is actually like a really good way to market and show off your business. Yeah. But I think as far as like maybe shippers and if you're going as a freight broker is to recruit shippers, or if your goal is to like for example reach like fleet owners, I think maybe TikTok would I would argue is probably not the best platform for that. But in terms of like reaching drivers, I think it's actually really effective.
Yeah, that's interesting you say that, because I was just having lunch before we did this recording, and apparently we put a video out that got like I'm going to look over here, like over 100,000 views or something. Yeah, like 200,000 views. And it was a driver holding up traffic but making a turn and then being cheered on while he did it. And that's right to your point, right? That type of entertainment clip is playing really well in the space, because this is the things that drivers like. It's sort of driving as a sport almost in that way. So that makes a ton of sense. And I think that's interesting in that. I think when you're trying to look at social media, and it's funny that we still describe it this way. This feels like I could have had this exact same conversation 10 years ago. But it's like when you're looking at social media as maybe a business owner, you kind of lump them all together. You just call it social media, right? You kind of look at it, you're like, oh, it's all, whether it's like Instagram or Facebook or Twitter or TikTok, you just sort of look at it as this like homogenized, social media. And I think you'd have to think of these things separately and differently in different user groups and different audiences that are kind of participating in these, and have a strategy that's unique to each one. It's not just setting it up and blasting agnostically across all platforms. You've got to be pretty smart about where you're going in, and I guess spending money in ones that may or may not result. So to your point, if you're looking at driver recruiting, maybe you're using TikTok. If you're looking at shipper recruiting, maybe you're using LinkedIn, and you're kind of breaking these things apart based on where the audiences are living, which I think in traditional media, that all makes perfect sense. That all makes perfect sense. You know exactly how that works. You put certain things on sports channels and news channels and Home and Garden Network and these things. But for social media, for some reason, and I think maybe it's because it just hasn't matured enough to that point, or the audience from an advertising utilization perspective hasn't matured enough. You don't really know how to look at it in the same way. But the lens, I think, is not dissimilar. That, you know, it's just media, right? You put the term social in front of it, and it seems to like blur the whole thing.
100%. I think what matters at the end of the day is really where your audience is. I think understanding who your audience are and understanding where they operate online. I think that's super. I mean, or even offline. But I think like particularly in the age of social media, where they operate online, I think that is super important. And I think crafting a strategy where you're very targeted about like where and how and what is the message that you want to deliver to your audience. I think that is probably like that is definitely the key to success, rather than like having like the same message across like all social media platforms, because they all do things slightly differently and they all reach people in like a slightly different way. So I think having that understanding is definitely crucial.
Do you think that is your initiative with TikTok changing as you go along here? So you've talked about it's early days with starting a business that will help with payroll with trucking companies. Is there a relationship between these two things, or is one simply just a byproduct of you again trying to show some of your friends what you were doing, and it kind of caught a little bit of momentum? Is there a way that you can see those two interrelating, or are these really kind of becoming separate initiatives, and the TikTok was just fun and maybe it kind of goes away? Or do you plan on continuing to lean into this and building something from it further?
That's actually a great question, and something we are actually trying to figure out internally. I think the reality is right now we are building back office software for fleet owners, and fleet owners are not on TikTok. Yeah. So I think that is kind of like a divergence in terms of our kind of like current business needs and what TikTok organically has grown, like the TikTok account that we have organically has grown into. But I think on that note, actually, I think one interesting thread that we discovered is for a lot of fleet owners that we talk to, they actually, in addition to managing their back office, like payroll, fleet management, and all these kind of back office tasks, and a really important one is actually also recruiting and retaining drivers. So I think that's where like TikTok, that I think right now we are at about I think like 10,000 TikTok followers, and I think most of them are like drivers. I think that's actually where we see like a pretty interesting advantage for ourselves, where we can maybe even leverage this platform to help some of the fleet owners that we've been talking to recruit and attract potential truck drivers. And I think again, like specifically how this will turn into a product, we're not sure. But for example, some fleet owners we are talking to, they're like, hey, like, can you just like give us like a quick shout out on TikTok, so drivers would kind of like see us and maybe like reach out to us and consider driving for us. So I think I would say like we are seeing kind of like the earliest transformation of this, like what TikTok account could be. We're still not sure. Again, we're still trying to figure it out, but I think there potentially could be some synergy between like the social media and also the back office software that we're building.
Okay, let's just do this. This is something I never really do in the podcast, but it's something we always do. I often do offline. So we're going to pretend like we're not on the podcast and you and I are just having a call. Like, dude, why don't you just take TikTok and then turn that into like a recruiting app? Because the biggest challenge out there is still driver retention and driver recruiting. So can you leverage TikTok in a way that becomes, I'm not suggesting you can white label it, but you see what I'm saying here? Like, can't you build sort of a driver recruiting playbook using like every channel around driver recruiting right now is completely smashed and been done for the most part. Like you've almost found like a novel approach to recruitment that nobody's done that in a very, very long time, right? It's like, it's just, they're tweaking mousetraps. This feels like it's got like something there, like where you can actually do something with that, leverage that and kind of recruiting. I don't know.
Yeah, it's something.
Like,
It's
let's
something.
let's give it away to all the listeners. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Don't worry. As long as you're creating, you're never competing. So I say this to anybody. It's like if you try and start this yourself, like you're gonna have to figure it out on your own. There's lots of things waiting for you that you don't know. But I think it's just to be totally transparent. That feels like a really interesting. It feels like an interesting project. Just in my mind, thinking about like. You leverage all these B2B products like as your best, like Salesforce, like great example, right? Like people build businesses on top of Salesforce. Like it's interesting to thinking about a B2B business built on top of a social media, like powered by TikTok. It's really kind of in my mind, kind of blowing my mind a little bit right now. Maybe that's already being done, but that feels really interesting.
To be honest with you, that's definitely something we're discussing internally as well. I think the vision that we have for interesting that you mentioned Salesforce, because I think that's definitely like a mental model that we use a lot. I think Salesforce is, I guess, like I see TMSs to be somewhat similar to Salesforce. I think TMS in transportation is basically kind of like the source of truth for customer data, for load data, for dispatch data. It's kind of like basically the front office software for your business. Whereas I think for us, where we want to position ourselves is we want to be the complementary back office solution to TMSs like RoseRocket, where we manage two of the most important assets for you. I think for any trucking company, there are two really important asset groups that you have. One is your drivers, and the other one are your equipment, your trucks, your fleets. So I think that's where we see the opportunity where we can come in and basically become the back office management software that unify HR and fleet management together. And I think with that, with HR, I think for trucking companies specifically, it's not just paying your drivers, retaining them, but it's also recruitment. So I think even with that, I think that's where maybe we can, kind of plug in the social media recruitment, element into it where, hey, not only do we help you manage your drivers, we also help you have a plugged in marketplace where we can, help you bring in new talent. Similarly, potentially, if I were to take that a step further, similarly with your fleet maintenance and management, side of things, not only do we help you maintain your fleets, but is it possible for us to also help you purchase new equipment and help you buy additional parts or trucks. So I think these are all the ways that we're thinking about it. But again, I think it's still early days, but I think these are all the exciting ways that we can think about how back office could evolve as we grow with the fleets that we work with.
Yeah, there's so much there in terms of how much work to do in the back office of a trucking company and how much is trapped back there, I think. So I think there's a lot to be gained from unlocking that. I think the unlocking of itself is, I've told you this before, I think it's going to be incredibly hard and incredibly thankless work. I think there's going to be so much that's just hard and sloggy about that, but I think if you can see it through and break through, I think there's a ton of value there. Because in that sort of Salesforce model, I think of you've branched further afield than the way I was thinking, but Financial Force is probably the best example of a company that sort of that they specifically said you work with Salesforce, and then we're the financial product for all Salesforce users. And unfortunately, in the TMS space, there isn't one system of record that has such a dominated presence like a Salesforce does. So I think there's unique challenges in trying to make a product that works across all or most TMSs, nicely, where I think Salesforce offers a bit of a cleaner opportunity from a single API, a single working relationship, a single kind of customer thread that you can pull on. We're doing that over multi-systems, I think does create a level of complexity that's, complex. But I obviously wish you the greatest of luck, and I think if anybody's going to break this, it's going to be you. It's probably going to take twice as long, twice as much, right?
I'm here for the ride.
Yeah, exactly. Good. I think just to kind of keep going on some of the social media stuff. I guess that's a question I have. It's interesting how you called out TikTok around it operating different. Is that the future, do you think of? And I know you're not a social media expert. I don't mean to put you in this category. I'm just interested in the way you described it. That kind of got my mind going. Is this a newer way of thinking about social media, more interest-based, more the connection-based? Is this something that's coming? And is there other stuff coming like this? Is this a new movement? Have they unlocked something here at TikTok, do you think?
I 100% believe that. I think it's definitely a new and innovative model that I think a lot of other platforms are also following suit. For example, Facebook and Twitter, you're actually starting to see more kind of like interest-based recommendation rather than, hey, like this is what your friend is doing, for example. So I think that I 100% believe that is the future. And I think we're going to see a lot more engagement on the social platform, like via this like interest-based like social graph rather than kind of like your like connection-based social graph.
How old are you?
I just turned 30.
Congratulations. It's a milestone.
You.
So I want to do this. So this is completely flipped from everything we've been talking about. So as a 30-year-old, a like a red-blooded millennial, like right up the middle, like what are you looking for so we get a lot of companies that are coming in that are asking about, modernization, about attracting talent. And this could be just like categorically. This isn't just like drivers. This is front office. This is executives. This is kind of everything. And I'm trying to tap into the workforce that is you. Like we're looking to hire you. How do in non-technical companies, so obviously trucking companies and freight brokerages, what are you looking for? What are your friends looking for? What do you guys like about working at places? How can our listener base who have companies like attract people like you?
Oof.
Maybe let me ask that a different way. What are companies doing wrong? So when you're walking into these organizations, you've been into plenty of companies and you're looking around, like what could they do a little bit differently to maybe give them a better chance?
I think the biggest thing, I think this probably goes beyond millennial, but I think especially for myself, I think the biggest question is the why. I think it's like, why? Like, why are we doing this? Why am I doing what I'm doing? Like, why should I be here rather than be somewhere else? I think really establishing that, like, why, I think that is like super important. Like, at least for myself, like understanding, hey, like, what is the mission? Like, what is like kind of broader impact that we are doing? And I think trucking actually is such a fascinating industry where we have such a foundational impact to the economy of the, to the economy. And I think that is something that I really find myself like falling in love with like day by day. I think like every day I spend in this industry, and I think that the more I kind of fall in love with like, oh wow, like what we are doing is like really, really significant. And there's like, it's like we are like reshaping one of the most foundational industries in this country. And I think that is really, really exciting to me. And yeah, I think, to be honest, that is, not obvious to a lot of my peers. I think when I talk to people, hey, like what are you doing? I'm building back office for trucking companies. You can imagine maybe the reaction on their face is not, it doesn't sound like the most exciting thing, but I think like to me, like, to be honest with you, there's like nothing sexier than what I'm doing right now.
Do you think this space is shy to promote themselves in that way? Like it seems like many who kind of find their way into it sort of fall in love with it over time or by happenstance almost. It's not an industry that's, like you said, your friends kind of look at you weird because the industry's thought about in a certain way. But many people who spend time here end up really, really enjoying it and having very different experiences than maybe they thought they would have. And why do you think that is? Like, why do you think trucking is so just not known to be interesting or cool or impactful?
I think it's perhaps a perception of trucking. I think for me, to be honest with you, like for the longest time before I really dug into it personally, it just felt like a black box. It felt like I know, okay, yeah, there are these trucks, moving things every day, on the road, but I really didn't understand. I didn't really understand it. I didn't really have like a vivid picture of like what that really means. I think it's only until I went to warehouses, I went to trucking companies. Like I even like, if you look at some of my videos, I even went into like the trailers of someone's truck to like look at, hey, like what is inside? I think these like snippets of like, hey, like what trucking actually looks like, that opened up my eyes to, okay, wow, like for example, the yogurt that I bought from the supermarket, I can literally like link how that got to the supermarket, like via like people unlocking unloading on the docks and transporting in a reefer and maybe getting loaded like through a shipper. I think that picture really helped me kind of build more empathy. And I think again, like coming back to social media, I think like by kind of creating these like images and these like like visual representations of like what trucking actually could be, or represented. I think that like really just like helped me personally build the empathy, and I think also maybe like opened up some of my friends' eyes to, okay, wow, that is actually really cool. I did not know this much about like trucking or truckers, matter of fact. So I think maybe I guess like if I were to be a bit more prescriptive, I think maybe is being able to helping people outside the industry to understand what trucking is about via a more graphical or visual way. And I think, because that is how social media, that's how media, relay messages these days, is through, kind of like these like visual mediums. So I think maybe that's like one thing that we can do as an industry to like showcase, hey, like we are doing really cool stuff, and this is how you can, understand it visually.
Yeah, we still attract talent here by having if we have a job applicant in engineering looking at us in 3 other places, we almost will categorically win by having, I should say categorically, but oftentimes we win by having the hardest problem to solve out of the bunch. So if you're sort of in that space where you're looking for hard problems to solve and you like hard problems, which a lot of people do, it seems. This is an industry for you, because there are some hard problems, to solve here. As we're up against the clock here, I have to ask: are there any interesting stories from your journeys, doing your videos? Did anything come across that you think is worth sharing?
I think the story I always go back to is actually always my very, very first truck stop visit. I remember it very well. It was in Lathrop. It was a Flying J in Lathrop, and it was like kind of like a cold, like somewhat like drizzling day, and I just wanted to talk to truckers. That was like literally my very, very first visit. So I walked around. I honestly didn't really know how to go, because right now it's actually a lot easier for me because I go up to people, I show them my TikTok, hey, like I'm this guy. I like make videos, so it's a lot easier for me to like basically have the motion down to like talk to people. But I think during that very first visit, I'm like very shy, timid, and just like like how do I go about this? This one driver, he's a lease owner operator. His name is David. He invited me into his truck. Like I sat at basically his sleeper on his bed while he was on the driver's seat, and we talked for about 2 hours. I didn't really know what I was getting myself into, but we literally chatted about just about like anything. He was coming from a third generation trucking company, a trucking family, and he's been driving 30 years himself. And he has 3 kids. He lives in Portland, but he gets, maybe see his kids like every 3 weeks. And I think the most heartbreaking part of that was he, even though I think like for me, like coming into the trucking industry, I think I had this like preconceived notion of like all truckers make really good money. This is an industry that gets paid really well. But I think for David, he was actually still struggling financially. And a matter of fact, he still like, uses food stamps to supplement his income. And I think that was something I never forgot. And just like, oh, wow, there's actually like a really big discrepancy between like what I thought the trucking industry was versus like kind of like the reality within the trucking industry. So yeah, I would say that's like something that always like really stuck with me.
Yeah, that's such a great story. I was picturing something funnier, I guess, in a sense, but that's actually a pretty important takeaway, I think, and it's a good reminder of what's really going on out there, and when we think about how stuff is getting to our shelves and the people actually doing the work, how close to the line a lot of people, are out there. And we have such a privilege working in technology and getting to work on ideas and, spending most of our days just talking about things that might happen or not. Like it's pretty privileged state of existence. So I think it's a really good call out to be grateful, and and I think having some just sort of moments to really be thankful for a lot of people doing really hard work that actually makes our lives easier, and having some empathy for what they're going through. So I think that's a really nice way to end things. And I think we're moving somewhat close to, I don't know when this will be released, but somewhere around, just maybe before America's Thanksgiving. So it's probably a good way to end that. We'll make it like a holiday outro. So Kevin, where can everybody find you?
You can connect with me on LinkedIn at Kevin Z Huang 10, or you can find me on social media, TikTok at Trucking Newbie, and similar handle for Instagram and YouTube, but it's Trucking Newbie 123 for Instagram and YouTube. So please feel free to connect with me or follow along my journey on social media.
Kevin, it's been refreshing and it's been a pleasure. Thanks for joining us today. And for those of you who like this show, be sure to like and subscribe. Bye for now.
Thanks for having me, Justin.